Thank you, Elizabeth. Does everyone hear me okay in the back? Yep. So, yeah, maybe I am a rock star because I started with rocks. I don't know. But as Elizabeth said, I did manage to find my way to where I am today. If you could try switching the screens. As she said, I've got a master's degree in geophysics. And what I found myself doing is, as I was in my program, I decided, the science really wasn't my passion, that I really wanted to work with people more. And what I found that I liked the most was problem solving and programming, because I was pretty good at that. I figured that was my marketable skill. So I got a job as an IT consultant back in the heyday before the bubble, and was able to get a foothold there programming. And then one day somebody came up and said, oh, for the next project we need a junior UI designer. Would you like to do that? And I said, sure. And then I went to my friend and said, what's UI? User interface? Yeah, what's that? But fortunately, I had some fabulous mentoring, did a lot of education of myself along the way, and started as a developer, then got into user interface design back before the web. Then I got into web production, product management. As Elizabeth said, went back to school, got my master's degree, and I'm now a user researcher. So I've kind of done all of those things. But what I found once I got into user experience is that I love the human and the computer-human interaction. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Okay. And just a quick thing, she did mention the HXR conference. I do work for Mad Pow, I need to say this. I do want you to know, even if you don't work in the healthcare field, we have several workshops that may be of interest to you. One on design studios, one on experience strategy, designing motivational interventions for behavior change. That has a lot of applicability, obviously within healthcare, but also even in financial services and other areas. And then a human-centered design boot camp and kind of Shark Tank to get feedback from potential users. Also, we're very excited this year. Our closing keynote is going to be Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. He's going to be talking about the opioid crisis and how we can tackle that problem, trying to inspire all of the attendees to solve design, combine health and design to solve that problem. So commercial over. We're going to talk about uncovering hidden truths. I'm going to talk mostly about user interviewing because that's a lot of what I do, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about is applicable in a wide variety of user research methods. Okay? And really, when I think about conducting user research at the end of the day, I feel my goal is to elicit honest stories from my participants in an unbiased manner. Okay? It doesn't matter what I'm after. I want the honest stories to understand their perspective, and I don't want it to be biased. And I emphasize those two words because I think that the honest is really coming from the participant. So as a researcher, I need to work hard to make sure that my participant is able to and willing to be honest with me and share the relevant details. And I think the unbiased part is on my part as a researcher. I need to make sure that whatever questions I ask, whatever methods I use to elicit their response is as unbiased as possible, and also my analysis and interpretation. So I need to go in with an open mind, ready for whatever they have to say. And I found this interesting, that there was a study actually out of UMass, I believe. 60% of people told an average of 3 lies to a stranger in their first 10 minutes of meeting. This is everyday people. Now, most of them weren't Enron quality lies, okay? Most of them weren't talking about a Ponzi scheme or Watergate. But there's this nice continuum from truth to lies. There's understatements, exaggerations, concealments, equivocations, and whatever other words you want to find in your favorite thesaurus for stretching the truth. There are varying shades of gray here. But the fact of the matter is, when we meet people and when we talk with them, every day in our lives, we stretch the truth a little bit, and other people do as well. We are lied to as well. So what is it that we can do as researchers to try and minimize this when we're trying to understand a particular domain? Particularly when we're doing formative research, we may be trying to find a niche for a new product. We might be trying to find a need that we need to fill. How can we get them to be as honest as possible? And when I was thinking about it, as a human being, it's not easy to be honest to strangers, okay? First off, we want to make ourselves appear better, okay? We want to make ourselves sound better. Social desirability bias, a lot of you will be familiar with that, anyone that took Intro to Psych, okay? Also, we often want to please the other person we're talking to. That's kind of the flip side of the same thing. Some people call that the researcher acceptance bias. As a participant, I want the researcher to accept me and like me. Also, when somebody asks me a question, heck, I've been on this earth more than 40 years. I can't remember everything. There are things that I'm going to forget. Same thing with our research participants. They may not remember everything when we ask them. And also, if we're trying to get a little bit deeper than the surface answers, if we're trying to understand what people's motivations and values are, they might not be 100% aware of them in a way that they can articulate them to us just by answering a question. So these are all sorts of reasons why people might not be telling us the complete and honest truth. And what I'm going to talk about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm sure most of us are familiar with that. Really, I want to focus on the belonging and safety area. In order for me to be able to tell you something very honest, particularly something very personal, I need to feel safe. I need to be able to trust you, to know that you're going to take that information, that secret I may have, and value it like I do and not mistreat it. So some psychological safety. Also, when we talk about social desirability bias and wanting to make that researcher happy, trying to please them, that's getting to our need for belonging. As human beings, we have social needs. We want to appear and feel part of a larger group and make sure that we have good relationships. So I think those are the underpinnings behind a lot of this. And what I've come to realize is in my interviewing and in my experience, I think there's 4 key things that I want to talk about that we as researchers can do to help people be honest with us. I'm going to talk about setting the stage for the interview. When you interview a regular consumer, they're not used to being interviewed. They don't know what to expect. They may be nervous. They may have a lot of anxiety that they bring to the table. So letting them know what to expect, letting them know how to behave is important. And encouraging them to tell their stories. I'll talk about various ways that we can do that and various things to avoid to turn them off from telling you the stories. And also being neutral. You never know what somebody's going to say, but as a researcher, you need to accept it because you're asking them their reality. You can't say, oh, no, you're wrong, because that's just going to shut them off. So I have to be encouraging, accepting, non-judgmental, and that isn't always easy either as a researcher. And then help them uncover their own answers. So I'll talk about some of the techniques that I've used over the years to help people in those situations where they don't know what to say, where they don't know the answers. We can co-discover them together and uncover them. Okay? So first off, an interview is a conversation. I like to think of it as a conversation, but it's sort of a conversation. Because casual conversations, like you just had in the networking beforehand, have unwritten rules. And a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of them. But there's a whole psychology to taking turns as you speak in conversation. There's pauses, there's body language, there's certain words that you say that indicate I want you to continue speaking, or I want to take my turn now. And there's a whole academic discipline around conversation theory, okay? And it's also very polite, particularly here in the States, that's what I'm familiar with. It's polite to balance speaking and listening in conversations. So when you're talking, you talk, you let somebody else take a turn, and then it's somebody else's turn, then it's your turn again, or however you negotiate that turn talking, you want to make sure to have a balance. Otherwise, you've all run into those people that won't shut up in social circumstances, and they're not quite so fun to talk to. And it's also polite for both parties to ask questions, okay? So, hi, how are you doing? What's going on tonight? What have you been doing lately? And then they ask you questions back and forth. But an interview is really a lopsided conversation. As a researcher, I'm the one asking the questions. The participant or the interviewee is answering them. That gets a little uncomfortable after a while for some people. But explaining that process and letting them know what to expect actually does build rapport with the participant and increases interviewee comfort. There's actually a study done from with criminal investigations about how rapport actually affects the criminal investigations. And they find that those interviewees in a criminal justice situation that do build rapport and explain the process to a very nervous witness or perhaps suspect, it does increase their comfort, and it increases their truth-telling as well. So that's important. So, when setting the stage for the interview, first thing I always do is set a high-level focus. Okay? I'm here to understand your experience visiting this museum, for example. Or I'd like to talk to you about your experiences in understanding and using your health insurance. So they know what I'm after. I'm being upfront and honest. But I'm not revealing all the details. I'm not revealing all the cards of absolutely everything I want to uncover. Because if I tell them exactly what I want to know, they may bias their answers and tell me what I want to hear. But I provide the focus, okay? And avoid some of that research or acceptance bias. I also let them know I'm neutral and I want to hear positive and negative experiences, okay? As a consultant, I'm in the great position where I can say, I didn't design anything you're going to see. So if you like it, you're not going to make me feel better. If you hate it, you're not going to hurt my feelings, okay? That can help reduce that bias as well. Or I don't work for X company. So, feel free to tell me the bad things and the good things. I often also apply to their altruism about, I want to learn what's good and bad so we can make it better for other people. Question?
What if you do work for the company and you did design the website?
Then you have to be extra careful to watch your biases. It is well known that, and I've forgotten the official psychology name off the top of my head, but if researchers have certain expectations, often the participants will figure out what they are and answer appropriately.
But would you...
I would not say that, no.
Would you lie to them and say, I'm not the designer, even if you are? Or?
I would not lie. I would just leave that part out and say, we're here to understand the good and the bad things so that we can make this better for other people. Because that's the reality. You don't want to lie to them because then they may lie back to you. Okay? And also explicitly acknowledge that you want to understand their personal experience. I've had so many people in interviews and other research situations that say, well, I don't know why you want to talk to me. I don't know very much about this. I'm not very good with technology. I don't know the X, Y, Z. But we are there to, that's part of our recruiting. We need to make sure that we get a mix of different types of people, but we want to understand the reality for each of them, I just did a shop-along study at a big box retailer. Hey, we're here to understand how everyday people do their shopping. Everyone's different. We want to understand what works best for you. That was the introduction I started with there. Or I did one where I studied patients that inject medication at home for certain severe illnesses. No, I know if I wanted to know how to use the pen, I could just read the instructions, but I want to know how you do it. Because often real people do things that aren't in the instructions. They take the shortcuts, they figure out what works for them, and that's important to get that back to the people that are designing things. So I kind of let them know that I want to be their friend and understand the reality, and I give them permission to not be perfect. And showing interest. Now, you'd be amazed how much it really makes a difference if you really care about the individual. If you have a good interest in what it is they have to say, you maintain eye contact, you use open body language, face the interviewee, lean in slightly, all those things tell them that you are interested in what they have to say. And if you're interested, they're much more likely to be talking to you and telling you the truth. Question?
How can you sort of project that in remote research?
Excellent question.
Repeat the question.
How can you project that in remote research? Maybe you're only talking with the participant over the phone. So I tend to use a lot of open dialogue up front, let them know I'm listening. One of the things I'll talk about is at times you want to be quiet and silent and let them speak. At other times you want to use some tokens to say, continue. Let them know you're listening. Let them know you're paying attention. Sometimes if I'm taking notes, can you hold on a second? I'm catching up on my notes. They know that I'm listening and actually care about what they're actually saying. Is there another question? No? Okay. And really listen to them. Okay? It's a positive act. You have to tell yourself to do it. Really listening is hard because most people are listening to figure out what to say next. What you want to be doing is listening to understand. What is going on in their head? What are the assumptions they're making? What is it like to be them in that particular scenario? And some people say it's like listening with your whole body. It's very tiring, but it's really important to listen because that's what enables you to understand and develop empathy with them, and then understand what it is actually that you want to probe on to get more detail. And using conversational tokens, like I said, there was a study done on a particular interview situation where they looked at folks where the interviewer said, continued, things like that as comments to let the participant know that I'm listening, I want you to continue speaking, versus just being quiet. And the interviewee's replies increased by 31% in duration. So people were definitely talking a lot more when they're encouraged that way. And then also body language. When you are in the same space with them, using head nodding, the same sort of study during an interview situation found that replies increased by 50%. So you can at least do one in a remote study. You can do both in person. And that does encourage them to talk more and tell more about their stories. Sounds like a contradiction here, but you can also use silence. I love what Steve Portigal said in his book about people speak in paragraphs. When you ask a question, you get the short answer. And if you pause for a couple of seconds, a lot of people are not comfortable with silence. So then they continue explaining. And the detail that they provide in that continued explanation can be extremely valuable. I've gotten a lot of good nuggets of information just by smiling and keeping my mouth shut. The trick is to balance both of them. Because I find if I'm just silent and don't say anything, that kind of shuts people down. So you have to vary it a little bit. And you also want to be, as I talked about being neutral, accepting, and non-judgmental, the biggest thing is asking non-leading open-ended questions. This is a great way to keep your bias out of it. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Start a question with any one of those words, and it's an open-ended. It's really hard to say yes or no as an answer. So you're much more likely to have somebody articulate a full sentence, and then that gives you some feedback on what they think is important so you can continue that conversation. Yeah. Who's involved with making decisions about your health insurance? Are they the only one doing it? Is there somebody else in the household? Okay. Where do you store your medications? How do you know when it's time to refill them? Things like that. And one of the things that I really believe in is using what I call soft questions to avoid judgments. I've seen some interviewers that like to ask a very direct question. Like in this particular situation, we were studying why don't HIV patients take their medications 100% of the time? It's a very valid question. It's a very important question. But if you ask somebody, why didn't you take your medication? What does that do? It puts them on the defensive. Well, social desirability bias. I'm supposed to be taking care of my health. I'm supposed to be a good patient, and I wasn't. So you don't want to put them on the defensive, because once you start doing that, they start shutting down, and then it's very hard to open them up again. So I like to come about it from different angles. Ask some other questions like, when was the last time you missed taking a pill? Oh, that was last week, last Tuesday. Well, what kept you from taking it? Not why didn't you, but what got in your way? So you're taking that responsibility out. You're almost giving them a way to save face, to turn down that responsibility. What kept you from taking it? Where are you when you take your pills? Maybe the location has something to do with it. What time? Maybe the time has something to do with it. What are you thinking about when you take them? Maybe there's some sort of emotional factor going on. So coming at it from multiple angles can often give you clues as to what might be going on, and then allow you to probe a little bit farther. And also, being neutral in your responses is important, okay? You want to avoid, as I mentioned, those conversational tokens or those little responses to what they say are important to let them know you're listening. But if you say things like, good, great, perfect, you're subconsciously telling them that they're giving you the right answers, and they're more likely to be answering similarly in the future. Likewise, if you say, really? That's kind of saying, oh, maybe that was the wrong answer. So you don't want to bias that way too. Or even things like, oh, interesting. That could be indicating surprise and unexpected answers, okay? And note that your tone of voice is extremely important there too. If I say, you're like, or that's a very different tone there. Or oh, okay. Okay is a little bit more neutral, just, I got it. But neutral responses like, continue, tell me more about that, all sorts of things like that are a lot more neutral. Tell them, yes, you are listening, yes, you want them to continue, and you're not necessarily biasing them by that. But being accepting and non-judgmental is really key to building trust, because at least in my role, I'm often interviewing people about things that are sensitive, about things that they hold close to their heart. We do a lot of work in the healthcare domain. I might be talking about their health. I might be talking to a caregiver about their parents' health. I might be talking to somebody about their financial well-being, which everybody's supposed to be managing their finances just fine and dandy, but not everybody does, and a lot of people are anxious about it. So you need to build their trust, and you've asked them to share their stories, and when they do, you had better be accepting of them, okay? Sometimes one technique I can use is a little bit of self-revelation. Again, don't lie, and balance this, only a little bit. I don't advocate going too far. But I did some phone interviews with people that were trying to lose weight, and I had one participant who didn't seem to think I understood, at least my interpretation was I didn't think she thought I understood her. So I said, I understand it's hard to be perfect. I have that issue too, because I do. Okay? That said, hey, I'm human too. Or I acknowledge that you're not perfect, I'm not perfect either. Or I appreciate you sharing your challenges with paying your bills this month. It's something I've struggled with before too. So that just again builds that rapport, lets them know that you are human as well. And that can really help combat some of that social desirability bias in sensitive situations. But you don't want to go too far either and put yourself in the situation of being their best buddy. Just a little bit at times. And be prepared for anything. Here's the fun bit. You never know what somebody's going to say. I was doing phone interviews about refilling prescriptions, and I got an earful about somebody's opinion on gun control. Okay, yes, it's polite to listen, yes, so on, but at times you have to say, okay, appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Now, I really have some important questions for you on X topic. Let's get back. But then sometimes those differences do apply to what you're studying. I was doing some research in a science museum and got an earful about somebody's strong opinions against evolution being taught in a science museum. This was in the South. Okay? I should have expected that. In fact, I did expect it. But I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. I've learned from that since then. But then at times, I do have people share things with me that I think makes me feel good because I think that they did trust me. So one particular situation, I was doing some interviews for a health insurer and talking about finding a doctor and what's important to you. And one nervous gay man that I don't think he wanted to admit he was gay finally said, it's important for me to know that they're gay friendly. I said, okay, that's good to know. Put that down. And I just felt good that, hey, I was able to build enough trust with him that he was able to share that. But that's important to know that. Okay? So being accepting and non-judgmental for the 30 minutes up until then, I think led to that situation. Okay? And as I've mentioned, there are sometimes we don't remember answers. Now I get the I don't knows or I can't remember, and that's perfectly valid at times. So one technique that really helps me with that is to focus on a specific recent experience to help somebody remember the details. We tend to generalize a lot, but focusing on a specific recent experience will give you some concrete information, okay? Tell me about the last time you went grocery shopping. What was your biggest headache? Okay, we all remember the last time we went grocery shopping. Well, most of us do, because most of us do it every week, or fairly frequently. Or think about the last time you went to the dentist. What were you feeling when you walked into the office? Were you happy to get your braces off, or were you scared to death about a root canal? Whatever. And remember that our brains work better with recognition over recall, okay? It takes less brain activity to recall, recognize information rather than recalling. And our brains store things in networks. So if, for example, you're thinking about leaves, when you think about things that are related to it, it's really easy to remind you of trees, plants, flowers, daisies, color green, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how can you leverage that when you're interviewing? One of the things that I really like to do is using photos to prompt their memory, particularly if I'm trying to uncover some information that I might not know how to ask. I might not know the right questions to ask to find out what's important. I will show a series of photos and ask them to set aside any photos that remind them of a particular topic. For example, set aside any photos that remind you of taking your medical injections. Okay? And then have them tell you the story about that, why they chose that particular photograph. So I did this in a study where I was looking at multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis patients and why they continued to take their medications. And here's just a handful of the images I used. Clock, pumping gas, kids, etc. I think I had about 200 of them in total. Some were positive, some were negative, some were kind of neutral. It was a nice mix. They were all pretty random. And some key themes that I found related specifically to those images were that from the rheumatoid arthritis patients, they said they were enjoying physical activities again. Less pain meant they could kayak again, or they could do other physical activities. They were regaining a sense of independence. They can pump their own gas. You know, who knew that being able to pump gas was important to them? Enjoying their family, they can do activities with that. That one made a lot of sense. But then got very different responses to the same photo set from those from multiple sclerosis patients. Things around concern for my future health. That clock picture made them think about, how long do I have to be healthy? Okay. Also, because of the type of medication they take for MS, it's not 100% proven that it works. The disease may just go into remission on its own, or the medication may be working, they don't know. So the gambling photos, the dice photos made them think about, I don't know if the medication's working, it's a crapshoot, but I'm going to try it. No? And enjoying family. I want to enjoy my family as long as I can. So that's why I'm taking my medication. That's why I'm risking this crapshoot. That's why I'm risking the side effects. So all these things, I didn't know what the answers might be. I didn't know the questions to ask. But just providing some photos allowed them to make those connections in their head. And they were able to tell me a lot of very useful information. Question?
Were those pictures carefully calibrated to not be like suggestive, kind of like, how do you avoid, how do you avoid making mistakes when taking pictures that put a tone or an idea?
So the question is, were the photos calibrated, and how do you avoid trying to put a suggestion in there or some bias in there? That's an excellent question, and I haven't figured that out yet. If anyone has some ideas or suggestions, please see me after, because that is one of the refinements I want to do to this. I just happen to have a series of photos that I got from somebody else that were fairly broad, and I picked and chose from those. I think I had about 150 in total. But I have no idea how to measure, is there a bias in there or not. Question?
What's your procedure with the photos? I mean, what do you tell them when you lay them out? Do you lay them out?
So what the question is, what's the procedure? I've done it both ways, where I've laid them out physically and had them choose, or I've just handed them the stack of photographs and said, I want you to go through them. They're randomized. They're, just set anyone aside that reminds you of this particular area of focus. In this case, medical injections. What is it like to take your medical injections? Or whatever your research question happens to be. Okay? Yeah?
After they take them apart, after they take them out, then you ask them to explain why they chose it?
Yeah, so the question was, what do I do after that? What I did in this particular scenario is I put a code on the back on a sticker, so I had a unique identifier back to a particular photo. I had them read the code to me, and then just tell me, why did you choose this photo? What does this remind you of related to your topic? And it's the stories that really are important. That's what I was after, to understand that. Very qualitative information. But the photo was just one way to remind them, oh yeah, this is something I want to tell you. Okay. And this is a variation on collaging that I started using. I've used collaging as well, where you actually give them, a very similar set of photographs or imagery, cartoons, whatever, and allow them art supplies to create a collage on their own. In this particular situation, I was going into the home. I didn't know what the physical environment would be, so I just adapted to using the photos. But with collaging, you can get a little bit more information. They have a little bit more time. And what I do is, again, provide a focus. Create a collage. This example I'm going to talk about was about what saving energy means to you. Okay? I wanted to understand what people do to save energy, but I didn't want to ask them that, because that biasing that has a bias in it, assuming that they are saving energy. So what does it mean to you? And then figure out from there, are they doing it or not? And again, have them create the collage and then tell the story, because it's the story that you're after. You're after understanding their perspective of the world. So here are a couple of examples of a particular collage. And in this case, I did put some imagery in that related to saving energy, but a lot that didn't. I would say I probably used like 25% that related to energy and 75% that were just random things like dogs. I think I see one of flowers, things like that. Completely random. But the interesting thing that I liked about that particular study, first I'll talk about the key themes and then I'll tell you about why I like the method. In this particular case, people feel that saving energy is important to helping the environment, but they didn't know if they were saving enough to make a difference. So again, here I found the key issue is that feedback loop wasn't there. They didn't understand how to measure what they were doing. And in particular, people who were renting as opposed to owning their home had much less feedback because a lot of times the heat was included in the rent. So they didn't even see a bill to know how much they were spending on heat and was that worth it or not, all of that. And how did they compare to their neighbors? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? And many said that they really don't make enough of an effort to save energy. And from that, I was able to deduce that saving energy in most cases was an effort. So there, the key is to make it easy and then understanding that situation about what would make it easy. So people were trying and they wanted to do things, but there's still too many roadblocks there, particularly the lack of feedback. But one of the things that I really liked about this particular method is a couple of my participants told me at the end of this interview, we spent about an hour, about 25 minutes doing the collage, and then the rest of the time talking about it. A lot of them said that when they came out, they'd actually learned something about themselves. They didn't know that that was what they were thinking. They wouldn't have been able to articulate it even if I had asked the right questions. The process of creating that collage and thinking through what's important to me before reporting it back was very valuable for them to uncover their particular values and motivations in this particular case. Okay. And another method that you can use, rather than using visuals, you can use words too. I've often used laddering to understand and get below just those superficial answers. Okay? People have difficulty expressing their values a lot of times when you ask them, particularly if it's something they haven't really thought about. But they can also often say, hey, I like these products, I like these services, I like this, I like that. So if you can start there, you can use a series of why questions to get deeper to find out what's beyond the superficial answer. So an example, I was studying, doing a usability test of a mobile app to order pizza. Pretty superficial, right? You order pizza, you get your pizza, you're happy. So I was showing them a prototype, and I said, what's the most important feature on this app to you? Okay. And the answer was deals and coupons. Okay. Why are deals and coupons important to you? Oh, because I like to save money and not have my wife yell at me. Okay. Well, I decided not to go after the wife yelling at me because I didn't want to get into trouble. So let's talk about saving money. What is it about that that's important to you? Well, we're trying to save as much as we can for our kids' college funds. That's a good thing, right? But why is it important to you to save for their college funds? It's expensive, but important, and I want my kids to have better jobs than I do. So from understanding deals and coupons, I get to the fact that they actually want their kids to go to college and have a better life. Okay? So that gives you an example. And you could say, well, why do you care about that for ordering pizza? Here I just show how it goes down. Because designs based on user values resonate better than those just on what they say they like, okay? So we could certainly make deals and coupons more prominent, but what if we also gave them the chance to have an account at UPromise, and every time they order a pizza from this particular store, they get money put into their UPromise account to save for their kids' college education? What do you think that's going to do to customer loyalty for ordering your brand of pizza? That's going to go up. Okay. So that's just an example of the types of situations where I've been able to use laddering to understand really what's going on under the surface, just through some interviewing techniques without using some of the photographs or other techniques as well. Any questions on that so far? We've taken a couple of questions as we've gone. Okay, so those are some, yeah, in the back. The energy one? Yep, what's the question? Yeah. So the question is, you're concerned that maybe they're telling the story that I still want to hear rather than what they actually do, because people say they want to save energy, but they also don't do it. And I think that's a great question, and one of the things I found with this one is that is exactly what I got out of it. That people said, I want to save energy, but then as part of their story, they told me about the things that they didn't do and why they didn't do them. So I think doing a lot of what I talked about before, setting the stage for the interview, being honest and so on, and then allowing them to think through all of this themselves, they went through that cognitive process about, I want to do this, but I'm not doing it. And to be honest, the entire art of interviewing is based on self-reporting. So we know that self-reporting is not 100% reliable. The challenge is how do we make it more reliable, because we get such good qualitative information from it that we need to do it somehow, because there's no other way to get some of this information. So I think that one of the things I liked about this technique was that I found that I didn't ask them, why do you save energy? I said, what about it? What does saving energy mean to you? And that allowed them the ability to say, yes, it's important to me, but I don't do it. Does that make sense? Okay. Another question?
Yes, I think your answer makes sense. And it seems on evidence is the kind of judgment you do. Can you say something about it? Opening interviews, all the details that have to be worked on?
So how often do I have to use judgments in interpreting the interviews? I think, I'm sorry, what? And how do I do it? Okay. Yeah, one of the things that, one of the techniques that I do is to make sure that I'm always getting as good notes as possible. I always record. We all know it takes extra time to go back to listen to the recordings. I try, if I'm doing interviews over the phone, I try to take notes myself as verbatim as possible. Otherwise, I try to get a note taker to do that for me so that I get as close to a good transcript as possible. At time, if I have the time or the budget, I will do a transcript from the audio. And then I go from that specifically to look at the questions and the answers. And I tend to pull out the quotes and use those so that I go back to the original data. Because if I just rely on my memory, I'm going to interpret biases there. I'm going to remember the most recent things. I'm going to remember the most extreme answers. I'm going to be remembering those from the people that I like the best, whatever. So I try to get the data down. My personal choice is a spreadsheet, or down on paper, whatever works, and then work from that. And then look at that, bucket them, categorize it, look for themes from there, and use the actual quotes to back up what I actually learned. Question? How do I think recording affects their answers? Honestly, from my experience and from what I've read of the research, after a few minutes, people tend to forget. The first few minutes, they're conscious of being recorded. Sometimes they'll look at the video camera. I very rarely get people that say, turn off the recording and I'll tell you the answer, because I generally don't do political things. Reporters run into that a lot more. But generally, I don't think it really has a huge effect. And there are times when people say they don't want to be recorded. I always ask up front, because we're ethical. And if they don't want to be recorded, I don't record. I just take a little bit longer to write my notes. Okay. Question in the back? So the question is, do I find a difference between when I'm asking about a product they've been using for a long time versus one that I may have just given them to use right now? Yeah, like the pizza app. The key part to your second question there about like the pizza app that they may have been using for a while and have an opinion on, one of the things that I didn't explicitly mention that I will say is I always focus on observations and behaviors. There's a lot of research out there in the marketing world that says people's opinions can vary. They can not necessarily be honest about what they're saying, particularly predictions about their future behavior, how likely are you to do X, Y, Z, are very suspect. Because people will tell you one thing and then they'll do another. They're not necessarily trying to lie to you. They just end up changing their behavior for various circumstances. So rather than asking their opinion on the app, what I always do in the usability testing world is have them use it and observe and then find what works. Now, there are times when I do ask, well, what's most important to you? And that sort of thing, they tend to have, in this particular case with the pizza ordering app, they had some experience with other pizza ordering apps. So they knew which they liked because they did have some experience with it. That gets a little trickier if it's a brand new concept. Okay? So let me just wrap up. There's a couple last things I want to say, and then I'll take some more questions. Oops. I went too far. I got clicker happy. Where was it? Okay. Oops. So the last couple of things I just mentioned anyway, avoid questions about future behavior. I always try to ask about recent past events because people remember the most recent things. And also, a lot of people tend to filter with generalities and leave out into particular details. So I always try to focus on specific instances where I can. For example, how many times have you forgotten your pills in the last 2 weeks? That's a lot easier to remember and get a more reliable answer than how often do you forget to take your medication as a general question. Okay. And like I said, self-reported answers are not always 100% reliable. People notoriously have difficulty explaining why they do things. I think we need to do the best that we can with user interviews to understand a lot of this. They sometimes may provide incorrect answers where they don't know why, but you get a lot of good information, okay? The key thing that I always try to do whenever I can is triangulate with other research methods. So validate what you hear as well. Observe people in action. That's one of the core principles with usability testing. You observe them using the system. And then from that, you can question to understand. Also, ethnographic observations, you can see a lot of wonderful things. When I was doing the shop along, people would say things like, oh, I always go down the same path around the grocery store and I never backtrack. Well, I saw them go around the path and then they had to backtrack 3 times, okay? So your observation's telling you something different. I'm going to believe what I see. And also in the digital world where a lot of us work these days, there's a lot of other data sources that you can use to understand user behavior. Take advantage of them. Purchasing data, web analytics, any sort of data you have about what your system's users are doing, take advantage of that. That can tell you the what that you wanted to focus on, and then use your user interviews and other qualitative methods to get at the why as much as you can. Okay? With that, I will say thank you. Question?
Something I do that I'll bet you do too, but you didn't mention, is if I'm recording, whether it's video or audio, and there's a really great quote or a really good example and I'm making a note of it, I'll also make note of what time it occurred,
Yes.
so that I can go back and get the exact quote or the actual video.
Exactly. Good point. Yes, I did not say that. Also, one of the other things is when I'm taking my own notes, particularly in writing, I don't just take the good notes after the good quotes, because that's another bias as well. They're like, oh, I said something interesting. She's writing it down. I write down everything. When I did my recent shop-along study last week, I was writing down, oh, you picked up bananas. Oh, you picked up laundry detergent. That wasn't useful to my research, but they were used to me writing everything down, so it was neutral. Question?
So I work for a social media analytics company, and we're talking about using other sources of data. And I think a lot of our customers use us to essentially replace things like focus groups and surveys. It's expensive, may not be as fast. Where do you think there might be areas or gaps where you would be able to get the same insight you would get with something like social media analytics versus actually being in front of a person and listening to things they have to say?
Okay, so for folks on the other side of the room, he works for a social media analytics firm, and a lot of people are using that as proxy for focus groups and interviews like that. So what do I think are some of the gaps? Is that the question? Well, first off, social media, there's a lot of people that are vocal on social media, but in most cases, that's not representative of your entire audience. So you're only hearing from a portion of your user audience, depending on who your users are. If your users are Twitter, different story. Also, I think on social media, there's still that social desirability bias. A lot of people are saying things because they want people to like them. They want to hear what other people have to say. I think, and again, this is my opinion, I think you also get a lot more extreme views on social media. From what I've seen of Twitter and Facebook, people tend to post the things they really like or not like, a little bit less in the middle. So if you're just going after the extremes, there's probably a whole bunch of information you're missing in that middle as well. So I think that can be used to definitely understand what's going on, particularly if there's a particular issue, if you had a bad customer service experience, for example. Listening to social media is great. It's a great data source, but I think it's a little bit extreme compared to the mass consumer or your main customers, but should be considered in addition to other methods. Generally, the more methods you can do, the more data sources you can get, the better. Question over here?
In response to one of the other questions, you talked a little bit about analysis, how you would look for groupings and themes.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you analyze the data from the interviews and whether you've used any of the qualitative data analysis packages and have a preference?
Yeah, I have not used any of the qualitative data packages. I would love to. They tend to be a little expensive. What I tend to do is, again, I use Excel is my choice. I put all my quotes in there, as much verbatim as I can get. I look for groups. I try to create a grid actually, where I like to have the questions down the side, or maybe the themes, because sometimes my questions may vary, or there's a group of questions, and participants along the top, and I will look along the same question. Sometimes I'll look down the same participant to understand if there's something going on with that participant. And again, looking for common things that are said more than once, trying to see beyond the words of what they actually say to what they mean. That isn't always easy. And then when I report out, I always report out what I heard and the key themes, how many people said it, or a few, immediate, some, most, because usually I'm dealing with small samples. And then if I'm making inferences to that data, I try to make that as obvious as possible in my reporting too. Here was a key, 3 themes that we heard. I suspect the underlying issue may be XYZ, because I don't know what they're thinking. I only know what they report. I only know what I observe.
So the samples are small, which is usually the case. What's the range of number of participants in these interview studies that you do?
The interview studies that I do, we tend to get about 8 to 10 per user category, user group. We try to define those user categories and groups based on behavior, not necessarily things like job title or demographic. Sometimes we find that the key thing for us is if we're finding consistency and repeatability, we think we've got a good sense of how that user group is behaving. If we've interviewed 12 people in the same user group and we're not seeing consistency, there's very likely other variations going on. That means we need to talk to more people and understand what's going on there. Question in the back?
Actually, more like a expansion on the last 2 questions. I have used qualitative data analysis packages. I was in an academic environment, so I had free access. It is very time consuming. You have to have a full transcript of your interview. Granted, it's a little bit easier now that we have speech recognition software that has come a long way since then. But the advantage of it is that it makes you read through everything and pull out the themes, not just the ones that you remember better, but how often do we have that luxury in corporate America? Right. So it's one of those things. I mean, if you have that luxury and your company is willing to pay for it, and I don't know what they charge now. I'm guessing it's about $2,000 for some of these.
At least.
Yeah, for one license. So, if you have the luxury, then it's great methodology. Otherwise, I had a professor who thought pen and paper was just as good as anything else. But it is important to look for how often people said something, not an exact word, but similar sentiment. And you're going to have to go through multiple times to get there. The software helps you organize it, but it doesn't do the work for you. It's not like you do a few clicks and it says, ooh, here's your analysis. We wish. To the social media question, I would add that the biases would be age, socioeconomic status, more urban residents versus rural because they don't have access to internet as much, and race.
Good points. Yeah, that's one reason why I like Excel, because it is, I've become very quick at it, but I think the key thing is to go back and look at your data multiple times. Because at least the way my brain works, and I think most people, is we're pattern seekers. So if you go look at the information, the patterns generally come up. That isn't to say that that's 100% reliable and duplicatable and so on. But in reality, in corporate America, when you have a certain amount of time, you do the best that you possibly can. Okay, one more question?
I'm wondering if you have any tips for dealing with maybe some challenging interviewees, so people who really love to talk, but it's hard to focus them, or maybe somebody who slipped through the recruiting cracks and it's maybe not exactly who you're going after, but you're trying to get something out of them.
That's a whole other talk. Honestly, a couple of quick answers. The over-talkers are, I think, harder than the under-talkers, for sure. Couple of techniques I found helpful. I tend to be a little more passive when I'm in research and let them talk. you got to step in a little bit more. You got to take control. So I'd say, great answer, but I want to make sure to get your opinion on a couple other topics. I'd like to move on. No, so that way I'm not shutting them down by saying you're talking too much, shut up. I'm saying, I value your opinion. I want to hear it on this thing too. And that I found generally variations of that will help me move on. And with the recruiting screener, when people slip through the recruiting screener and they're not quite what you want, it all depends on, do you think you're going to get useful information out of them? I did stop a phone interview after 10 minutes when I didn't think I could get anything out of somebody. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I can't remember exactly what I said. It's really awkward, or I'm having technical difficulties if it's an in-person prototype test for something. Go in the other room, come back, I'm sorry, our prototype isn't working, and we really need to let you go. But if you are paying them, you still pay them because they fulfilled their end of the bargain by showing up. And then you call your recruiter and say, we had an issue. Okay?